Well, joining me now to look at this first week back of Parliament are three MPs from the different parties. Arif Virani is a Liberal MP for the Toronto riding of Parkdale High Park. He's a Parliamentary Secretary to the Justice Minister. Randy Hoback is a Conservative MP for the Saskatchewan riding of Prince Albert and his party's international trade critic. And Daniel Blaikie is the NDP member for the Winnipeg riding of Elmwood-Transcona, and he's also his party's international trade critic. All three of you, welcome back and thanks for taking the time.
Glad to be here, Martin.
Okay, let's start with, obviously what has been garnering so much attention and Canadians have been quite concerned about is the coronavirus and the government's handling of the whole situation. Mr. Virani, there's been questions about screening and there's been questions about Canada repatriating Canadians who want to come home. How would you say the government has been doing? There's still ongoing questions about what we should be doing.
Well, we're taking this issue very seriously. We're assisted by the border officials, by the tremendous work being done by Theresa Tam and the individuals at the Public Health Agency of Canada. You've heard Minister Hajdu many, many times speaking to the media. The most important message for Canadians is that there's a situation. The situation is under control. We are assessing and evaluating every case that presents itself. There had been 3 cases, one of which has actually already been resolved. There are now 2 confirmed cases. Other cases are being investigated, but we're urging Canadians to remain calm and understand that the situation is under control and that we have the mechanisms in place 16 years after SARS in order to handle this very important situation, very delicate situation.
Okay, just have a quick question before we get to the other 2 MPs, but quick question. The Minister still didn't answer the question today, and it's a recurrent one, and that is as to whether when we bring Canadians home, they will face a quarantine. And her answer was, well, the Chinese authorities are not going to be letting sick people get on the plane, but of course they can develop symptoms between getting on the plane and getting back here. Do we have an answer as to whether we will quarantine them?
So what I can say to you and the viewers is that we've had discussions about having people brought home, Canadian citizens brought home from China, and Minister Champagne had a conversation with his Chinese counterpart just in the last about 12 hours. It was a very positive conversation. We've also already secured a plane to help with that evacuation. In terms of the steps that are taken once the people arrive here, I don't have any further information I can provide you with, but we'll do everything we need to ensure both the people who are leaving are safe, but also that Canadians remain safe here.
Okay, Randy Hoback, your impression or your party's position on how the government has been handling this very sensitive and very important issue?
Well, we've been asking questions that Canadians are asking. We've been looking for ways or answers so that, no different than what they're asking us as they phone us. I think what we're seeing here is it shows that maybe we haven't done a good enough job having an emergency plan prepared so that when something like this happens, we know exactly what to do. It's sitting on the shelf ready to pull off and we implement it. So that might be something that we have to do in the Health Committee, put that together so that we have a game plan in place. So we're not waiting for the government to react, over a week or 2 weeks. They actually have a game plan they can go to and say, okay, this is what we do in this type of scenario, and bang, 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 and everything goes into action. And I think that's the frustration I think a lot of Canadians are looking at right now is they're saying, okay, give us the information, and the governments are trying to figure this out on the fly, and I don't think that's a good way of doing it.
Okay, Daniel Blaikie, your impression, I know we've spoken with you several times over the course of the week, your impression of how things are as the week comes to an end in terms of coronavirus?
Yeah, well, we thought that out of the gate, Canada was doing a good job in terms of its response, but the situation's been changing quickly and we're concerned that the government response isn't keeping pace with events. And so, even on the show last night, avid CPAC watchers will know that Rob Oliphant was talking about how, they didn't want to just have, what he referred to as a dusty old plan. So Arif today is saying, well, we have a plan in place and we learned lessons from SARS. Yesterday they were saying, well, we can't just use any old plan. We need a new plan for new circumstances. In fact, Rob said there were multiple plans. The problem is that the government hasn't shared any plan at all with the public. So all we know is that they've secured a plane. We know that other countries already have done more and announced more, particularly on the issue of quarantine, whether it will happen, where it will happen, when it will happen. And so I think the time has come now for the government to at least share some of its one plan or many plans or whatever it's got. It needs to start putting on the table publicly so that Canadians can see the work.
Exactly, and I think actually show some action. They actually have to start making some decisions and actually moving forward. We haven't seen any action or any decisions being made, so they've been hinting they're going to do this or hinting they're going to do that. They need to just go and do things and get action going, and that's important.
Okay, Mr. Virani, I guess one question that does come up, and I didn't ask you directly, but what is taking so long for getting the Canadians? We've heard different snippets of explanation, but nothing official in terms of what's taking so long in terms of getting Canadians on that plane. And I know there's been issues with reunification of people who are Canadian citizens versus permanent residents, but what is taking so long to get them out of there?
So the situation on the ground is complex. You have Canadian citizens and permanent residents that are reaching out. 274 people have reached out to our consular officials thus far. They're all being provided with consular assistance, which is important. In terms of the criticism of being leveled that we're not being transparent and we're not actually taking action, I think those are actually categorically false. We've deployed extensive personnel, both CBSA and public health agency officials, to the 3 main airports that are receiving individuals. We have hospitals that have already received individuals and are treating them already successfully thus far. And we are in conversations with the Chinese about removing individuals, and we've already secured a plane. And also Theresa Tam, our Chief Medical Officer of Health for the country, is also part of the consultative body for the WHO, showing the level of expertise that we wield.
But in Wuhan, in the actual city, the most affected city, is it a question? I mean, we've heard suggestions that it's getting cabs to get people to the airport. We've heard questions of it's getting through roadblocks. I mean, what from what you know has been the biggest obstacle to getting people on those planes and out of there? Not that that's the only solution of getting people out of there, but.
Well, I'm not going to speculate about cabs in Wuhan at this point. What I will say to you, Martin, and to the viewers is that the situation is in flux. The issue is an issue of safety, and there are cases that are cropping up, both in Wuhan and around the planet. We know that there is very high likelihood of more cases. We're treating them appropriately. And also just add into this conversation, there's been a level of xenophobia and sometimes overt racism towards the Chinese Canadian community, which none of us want to see. I was encouraged by a Conservative member today in question period making a statement about challenging that kind of racism towards Chinese Canadians. We don't need to see that. That level of overreaction is not appropriate, and it's not valid, and it's not based on any evidence.
And I know Mr. Andrew Scheer, the Conservative leader, was in Chinatown, eating in Chinatown today as a symbolic gesture. I heard someone else wanted to weigh in on that. I don't know who it was.
Yeah, they talk about action. Well, if you look at what's happening today in Europe, the UK has made an agreement, and actually the plane has landed today with passengers for the UK, and I believe Spain also on that same plane. So other countries have been able to get their plans in action and actually getting their citizens back home and working together. So to see the delay coming out of Canada is frustrating, and it's frustrating for the Canadians who have families in China at this point in time, and they're wondering why we couldn't be on that same level. So that's the frustration that they are feeling, and I think that's the concern that's here is why somebody else can do it and we can't.
Okay, I want to jump in on another big issue which came up this week, and that is NAFTA. We saw the tabling of the implementation legislation. We had a Ways and Means bill which passed, and we saw the tabling of the implementation legislation. Arif Virani, the minister, Minister Freeland, the Prime Minister, your government has expressed a lot of hope that this will pass quickly through Parliament, but the suggestion is it may take a lot longer than you're expecting. What do you expect for the passage of NAFTA?
Well, we're looking for parliamentarians to act with the nation's best interests, and I'm pleased to say the Conservatives and NDP have demonstrated that. There's been some questions raised by the Bloc Québécois, sometimes inaccurately, about the impact that this deal will have on the aluminum industry. We've got a vibrant aluminum industry. What we've secured with this deal is a 70% guarantee of a quota of aluminum being used. It must originate from North America. The quota right now is 0, so that's a strong step forward for the aluminum industry. That's why Premier Legault of Quebec has said he is forcefully in favor of concluding this deal quickly. We've seen the Mexicans and the Americans ratify it. What we need to do is put the economic interests of all Canadians first, and we're seeing that from the 2 parties that are represented, the other 2 parties on this panel, which is a good sign. So we're optimistic.
Okay, Randy Hoback, your party has more or less said that you are in favor of free trade and you're predisposed to support this implementation legislation, but how do you see this going over the next few weeks?
You know, we're not going to play silly bugger with it. There's no reason to play politics with this file. Yet we do have some questions, and we are looking for information that we've been asking for over 51 days that hasn't come forward. You know, there's an economic analysis that's still not been completed. We know there's been an economic analysis done in the SM4 and the dairy sector that is still being held as confidential. You know, so that makes it frustrating. And we did have another briefing offered by the minister this week, and in that briefing we did talk about aluminum and the concerns we have with aluminum. And Richard Martel, an MP out of Quebec, out of Chicoutimi-Laforge, brought forward a suggestion about green aluminum and how environmentally friendly our aluminum sector is out of Quebec. And his suggestion actually had the negotiator saying, you know what, maybe this is an angle. So this is why we need the information. We can't change the deal. It is what it is. But we can pick apart the weaknesses and try to find solutions for those weaknesses. And we have to address the sectors and the industries that are left behind and find out what the game plan is for them so that they're not left behind, left holding the bag.
Okay, Daniel Blaikie, the Green Party this week said it will support CUSMA because of the improvements in the environmental protections. The Conservatives are saying they will eventually support the implementation legislation. Monsieur Blanchet from the Bloc Québécois says his party will support the legislation. Where is the NDP? When will you decide whether or not you're going to be, or whether this deal is worth voting for?
Well, I think it's important to recall that the implementing legislation for the deal was only tabled yesterday. So what we've said is that we have an open mind and then we're looking at it. There are concerns. We've heard some of those concerns already. The Bloc Québécois certainly has not been the only one to raise concerns about the aluminum industry in Quebec and also in BC where they make aluminum as well. And we're not just looking at the dairy sector, although we're concerned about the dairy sector, so we want to understand what the government's real compensation plan going forward will be. They haven't given any details of that. We've raised concerns about the so-called good regulatory practices chapter in NAFTA and what that means for downward pressure on regulating in the public interest. So there are a lot of concerns. We want to look at it. We're keeping an open mind. I have to say, it is shocking to me. We heard it in question period again today, if I'm not mistaken, or certainly yesterday, that the government is developing its economic analysis and it hopes to have something that it can release soon. That means that the deal was signed without the government having an economic analysis. Now you tell me what Canadian thinks it's a good idea to have a government run out and sign a comprehensive trade deal with two other major continental partners, the only continental partners, without already having done its homework. So there are things that are broken about Canada's trade process, and that's been the other thing that we've been trying to make part of this conversation. We've reached out to the government on it, is how do we have a proper codified trade process so that Canadians can know what to expect in terms of the information they're going to get, to involve Parliament before the negotiations have begun instead of after there's already a signed deal. And we think this is the time to talk about it now because we know that there are other trade negotiations on the table, particularly Canada-UK. So there's an opportunity here for Canada to get it right on a trade negotiation process that gives more openness and transparency for Canadians, and we think that has to be part of the conversation going forward as well.
Okay, to all three of you, Arif Virani and Randy Hoback and Daniel Blaikie, I want to thank all three of you for taking the time. It's good to see you all back, and we will continue our discussions over the next few weeks.
Good to see you too, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.